All righty, let's start with the good stuff. Let's begin on a high note, and hopefully we can end on a high note as well. What's been successful in the classroom? What works for you? How do you effectively engage students around these topics? And then we'll save the third one for more of a broader conversation about who our students are and how we work with the identities that they bring to the classroom. Hey, Louise, there's Louise Kanker. Welcome, Louise, another colleague of ours at Marquette University, teaches this stuff as well, does some great work with engaged learning. Welcome, Louise.
So, John, we'll kick it off. John, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to. He mentioned he loved the ideas from Dasha Kelly in the last session, and some of the conversation lesson with primary documents have been great, looking for more pragmatic ideas like that. So, just to fill folks in, what we ended up doing, this is an idea extending from a year-long project that we did in the year subsequent to the 50th anniversary. And Dasha and I were just kind of kicking around ideas of how do we make young people excited about history, and we knew the images were really powerful and we could feel the emotion that people expressed upon seeing them. So we basically just made a meme making activity. When we do it the full way, we print out photos, we put them in front of students, then we get transparency sheets, and then they're able to write right on top of the photos. I actually like getting, so I have a big bag of silver Sharpies, so they can write against the black and white, and it kind of pops out a little bit. That I find the tactility of it, of them getting their hands on it. Rob and I just did this in Milwaukee. Actually, the very last hour of the very last day that MPS was in session, we were at Milwaukee High School, the arts, and the art students who were kind of quiet about a lot of the other pieces. When we put the images in front of them and they started to get their hands on them and work with them and look at them, man, it was like a dream come true to see those high school students just like who are art students just like engaging with history and responding to it in a really interesting way.
And I think to that point, if we answer the question, or if I answer the question, what's been successful in my experience, engaging the arts is very important. I can't emphasize that enough. Whether that's in the classroom or uh, class experiences that are outside of the classroom as well. One particular event that we were a part of at Marquette included taking our students to see the play The Niceties over at the Repertory Theater here in Milwaukee. And engaging the arts is very powerful because the arts can do things that the academic or the educator maybe struggles with a little bit. The arts can tug at emotions. The arts can give us a window into feelings. The arts can elicit a whole set of responses that even the most difficult of classroom topics sometimes are challenged to do. And so, if there's one particular broader tip, idea, strategy, method that I would encourage is engaging the arts as much as possible. Everything from poetry, music is very valuable. You can't there for these types of issues. You can call on the work of Stevie Wonder and uh,
Mm-hmm.
Curtis Mayfield and Beyonce. You can call on musicians of a wide variety to help complement and supplement what we do in the classroom. A lot of what we often do, understandably, is we put the onus on ourselves as educators to carry the weight of the conversation, and the arts helps to take a little bit of that pressure off and let the artist speak and let the artist tell some of these stories and engage some of these questions. The other successful strategy, as we all know, is using primary documents, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail. The documents oftentimes allow for the issue to be discussed through the document, so that we, as the educator, are not solely responsible for carrying that weight and carrying that burden. The documents are, as Adam mentioned, artifacts that we can go to that help to tell the story, to help to tell the narrations, complement the narration that we're doing in class. So the arts are very valuable. Let's never forget the importance of those.
So Keisha made a really good self. Feel free to interrupt Rob or me. You'll notice that we feel free to interrupt each other, or also you can drop stuff in the chat as well. Anybody have an idea? Where you can respond to any of these questions that are out here right now, methods that you found successful in your experience, how you engage students into difficult topics, and even some thoughts about who your students are and how their identity, what they're bringing into their classroom.
Yeah, I'd like to hear some voices. Anybody that wants to chime in and talk a little bit, please do.
I can speak from a middle school educator experience.
Please do, Matt. Absolutely.
Love it.
Sure. So I kind of have the benefit of having a shop as an engineering instructor. And so I try to stage my projects around more open-ended results. Instead of saying we're all going to build this, we're going to build or make something that uses tools A, B, and C, or 1, 2, 3. And the projects that kids make get so personal oftentimes, which, whether it be formally or informally, leads to further conversations, I've noticed, since I switched to that format. And kids talk to each other like, oh, I made you design that, or I made you come up with that. Whether it be 3D printing or laser printing, or CNC milling, any of the T-shirt stuff that we do. I try to keep it that kids can be creative and kind of express themselves through their artwork or their projects. That art piece you mentioned really made me think of that. I've had other people come and visit and actually kind of study how I do that. And I've had a lot of success with it and kind of letting kids express who they are through their projects.
If only people would teach civics that way. What's the 3D printer for civics? Sorry.
Don't know. I mean, well, you know what? I did. I mean, I'll incorporate other cross-content pieces into it. So, like, we did a laser project one time where they had to do some cartography and make a map, and each layer of cardboard represented an elevation. And so they had to pick a country of interest to them, and they had to do some research on the country itself. And I did not let them pick the United States. They had to pick somewhere else. But it led to some really deep conversations, to be honest with you.
The other really successful experience that I'm really always thrilled to engage, and I think students at all levels appreciate this, is the guest speaker. And in many respects, the guest speakers that I rely on heavily are local experts, community activists, community voices, folks who are oftentimes seemingly disconnected from the classroom, but whose experiences, they bring their own particular kind of intellectualism to the classroom. The folks who are in many respects at the grassroots level, right on the ground, grappling with issues in real time. These folks are so valuable to the classroom, and many of them really want to be in the classroom. And I know that there are challenges that institutions might raise to getting some folks into the classroom. I'm sure there's a whole set of protocols that go into that, but relying on local expertise, particularly when teaching local history or using local history as a window into broader historical topics, we just can't ever go wrong when we bring in folks who are really in the middle of some of these basic fights around equality.
Even sometimes I found when doing, because I do some work I do tours and work with school staff sometimes. A lot of times there's even really incredible people just in the building. I found if you start a conversation that's typically not had among a staff or faculty, you might find that someone, might find a paraprofessional. This has happened several times for me. Someone who's just someone from the neighborhood will come in and say, oh, I know that. Or even, I'll say this, bus drivers. I've done tours before.
Yeah.
Bus drivers, I'll tag them in. And a bus driver will know a ton. On open housing marches tour, I talked to a guy who was like, he's like, oh my God, it's like you're walking me back through my childhood. So so experts, and I always like to point to the expertise you can find within just kind of what's become common to you. There can be some really extraordinary things in there. John made a great point here about 3D printing for civics isn't branding. 3D pumpkins at Halloween for the Democratic primary candidates. 3D party representations. That's a very
John, you just
creative.
You're just gonna lob that pumpkin, that orange pumpkin up there for us like that. Come on, man.
Yeah, that's great.
Just gonna lob that up there for us. Let's get into this third question, and then we'll move to our next section. Who are your students? And let's be also very direct about this. You know, we're working with overwhelmingly students who are in the city of Milwaukee. Many of them are African American and Latino, as well as from other populations. We work with white students as well, but we know we have some folks on the call who are from districts that are overwhelmingly made up of white students and white families. If you want to share some of your thoughts and some of your challenges, please do, because we know that it's in those environments where we sometimes need the most support. And as we think about that, let's talk a little bit about who our students are and how their identity impacts the classroom. But some of you folks from some of these districts where there are not as many diverse folks there, if you want to share some ideas, we really appreciate it. And I'm sure there are other folks on the call who will as well. Thanks, Ms. Pitts. That's very important. K-5 suburban students who are transitioning from Chicago, Madison, Milwaukee. Yeah, 94% white. It's a challenge, absolutely.
So at Marquette, and the institution I'm transitioning to is a predominantly white institution. And whenever I, as a woman of color, talk about racialized topics, I get accused of being biased, but then there's also white defensiveness that I am calling them personally bad. And that tends to be the thing that I have not quite figured out how to address.
Other folks experience those kinds of challenges in the classroom? Because it's not only the identity of the students that are at work, but it's also the assumed identity of the educator as well. Absolutely, Nate. You know, Nate, that's an interesting mix over in West Dallas, though. I don't think folks would have guessed that West Dallas was that diverse.
Sure. It's changed, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to be in that environment. And I think to the last point about talking about race, culture, identity is something that I think is not necessarily supported at times. Students, a lot of our staff say, I don't see color, but yet all the kids do. And yes, you do too. And if you don't capitalize on that and talk about that and represent that to your students, you're missing a huge way to connect with them. When you bring up race as a topic, ethnicity, culture, all that stuff, the kids, a lot of those kids will just light up and they're going to be totally engaged. They're going to see you coming from a genuine place of courage where you're willing to discuss stuff like that instead of just pretending it's not there and just doing what you know how to do best, which is teach the culture and teach the way that you maybe were taught as a kid and have no understanding of how other students may be learning that are different from you. It's kind of like, come along with me because I know the right way. Be more like me and you'll be more successful. And you're going to have a lot of kids putting up their hands and say, I'm not going with you with that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, John, we appreciate you sharing that about your sister having that challenge canvassing for Hillary Clinton in West Dallas, which, you know, it's a very interesting set of cultural collisions happening in surrounding suburban districts where they're becoming more diverse. Classrooms are becoming more diverse. The staff and faculty may not be as diverse. And so you have both the institutional challenges and then also the classroom challenges, which are made all the more complicated by the challenges outside of the classroom and outside of the school, you know.
I want to make sure we don't miss a comment that Louise made before. Teaching white supremacy this week, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Case Reparations, Edward Bonilla Silva, Racism Without Racist, Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, and asking students to put these in conversation with each other. Louise, I have a question for you. Do you excerpt those? Because those are all pretty hefty uphill climbs for a lot of students.
Yeah. College or
otherwise. Yeah. Do you take sections that you selected for them to make the reading burden a little less?
You want to jump in and talk with us, Louise? We'd love to hear from you.
Or you can chat. Maybe she thought we ignored her, so she was like,
oh, there we go. The whole Atlantic article in the Michelle video. You know, the Atlantic as an intellectual space is very valuable because they do oftentimes provide videos to supplement the articles that the experts are writing. And it's oftentimes very useful to let the videos of the writers and the journalists and the scholars also be in conversation with the written text. And we do have to, as we all know, rely on multimedia or multiple media or a wide body of media to get into some of these conversations and to make them work. To that point, I want to encourage graphic novels. You know, there was a moment where graphic novels were really starting to kind of creep into the classroom. And I feel like over the last couple of years, we sort of backed away. But, you know, there's some great graphic novels out there. And Adam and I have been threatening to do some graphic novels of the open housing marches, and we should be held accountable and do that. But let's not forget about what might seem to be simple or simpler texts, simpler education materials that we can use in the classroom, because for so many of the students in our classes, and in some cases for us as instructors, you know, a lot of us are being exposed to this for the first time, and they're already complicated enough. And so simplifying or simpler teaching materials are very useful. Absolutely, Janice. March is excellent. Multiple volumes, an American.
Novel seems to ignited the conversation a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, before we move on,
Tanya said we better do it now.
before we move to the next section, there was something that one of my colleagues did at Marquette, and I thought it was a really interesting exercise for students that could be adapted from, I mean, really from elementary throughout college. But they were assigned for a history class, they were assigned to make a self-exhibit, as if they were designing a museum exhibit that explained who they were. And but they couldn't use like a picture of themselves, they had to use objects. And so they had to have a certain number of objects and write out, you know, the explanation, this represents this, and as if they were actually doing a real exhibit. And it was really interesting because some of the ones that I saw, it, when you read it, you realize you almost can't get a picture of who that person is in your mind, because when you look at them, what you think their background would be or what their experience would be doesn't match what they feel it is, or what they're displaying about themselves. And so that could be a really unique tool and a really great activity to have students do, because then it gets deeper below the surface with not only how they see themselves, but then they start to see their classmates and they're like, wow, I really connect with them on this, or hey, we kind of have the same thing here. Whereas before, if they just look at each other, they're like, I don't know if I can connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Brianne mentioned the Zen education historians Zooms that are happening. Those are pretty amazing. I've listened in on a couple of those. Those are really, really good. And I also want to get to William's point about Kindred, which gets us into, I think, another avenue, which is science fiction, and what we have been referring to as Afrofuturism. You know, all of that creative and that creativity that comes into exploring issues of race are very valuable. Again, it kind of takes the pressure off. It allows for the conversations to be had in creative ways that allow you to get into some topics that then don't put the onus purely on the instructor and the educator. And I want to make sure that we get back to Lisa's point. You know, what Lisa really is mentioning, there's the challenges as a woman of color. You know, as a Black male, when I walk into a classroom, I come with, in an odd kind of way, I come in with quite a bit of authority that I hadn't actually earned. You know, I get it because of my race and my gender, and I don't experience the same kind of pushback that I know a lot of women who teach these topics experience. And so that requires not only for the departments and the leaders of our departments and our academic institutions to be supportive, it also requires the entire institution to be held accountable for making sure that we support folks who are meeting resistance in the classroom because they are women or because they are from different backgrounds or what have you. And so we have to make sure that we are also demanding that our institutions and our departments own up to supporting us in these very difficult and challenging conversations with our classes.
I just want to, before we move to the next slide, just a little background on this image that a lot of folks probably can't tell. The commandos are looking at some campaign materials from George Wallace, when he visited Milwaukee. And when George Wallace visited Milwaukee, he was greeted by Southsiders singing him Dixie in Polish. And he is on the record saying that if he could live anywhere outside of the South, it would be the South side of Milwaukee. 50 years ago, of course. But that is just something to, when we have conversations about Milwaukee today, that population has largely moved into the suburbs south and west of the South side. But something to keep in mind.